Good afternoon, everybody. It's Loren Lockman from the Tanglewood Wellness Center, and we've had several conversations over this last session about creating a high level of emotional poise. And what I'm going to try to do today is, as much as I can, fill in some of the holes and complete that conversation. Just a reminder that when I'm talking about emotional poise, what I'm really talking about is creating a way of being in the world emotionally where whatever happens, you're able, if you're not always maintaining equilibrium, you're able to regain it very quickly if you lose it. Ideally, ultimately, we get to the point where almost regardless of what happens, nothing phases us because we understand, at the extreme we understand that nothing is really, everything is temporal, nothing is all that important, right? We live forever, not in this form, but in some other form. And whatever happens in this lifetime isn't usually nearly as important as we may think it is. From there, we may step down, or be stepping up to that point, and we may have realized only as far as that when things are happening that seem like they might not be good, it may well be that we simply don't understand yet what's going on. And that might be as good a place as any to start today. We all encounter difficulties in life. Things happen, people get sick, people die, relationships end, material things fall apart, and whatever that happens to us that seems bad, I would encourage you to remember that nothing is good or bad until we say it is. That it's our judgment, our belief about it, that makes it so. And so, if you find yourself in a situation, and if you're not in the situation now, you will be before too long, because again, things come up. So when you next find yourself in a situation where things aren't exactly the way you'd like them to be, you might want to simply remember that you can't know what everything means. You can't know what the implications of everything that happens is. And let's look at an example. Let's say a close personal relationship comes to an end. Does that happen every once in a while? Right? Of course it does. And it's painful. It can be very painful when it does. But ultimately, what I try to remember when that happens, and I'll grieve the relationship, I'll suffer in most cases, but then I try to remember that if the relationship came to an end, then that must mean it wasn't the perfect relationship for me to be in. And if it wasn't the perfect relationship for me to be in, then being in it meant that I wasn't open to the perfect relationship occurring. I need to liberate myself from something that's not right before something that is ideal for me could actually come along or could be created, co-created, because we don't actually find a perfect relationship because a perfect relationship doesn't exist. We have to create one. But we can't create one if we're involved in creating something else, even if this is completely failing. We have to liberate ourselves first before that can happen. Another way of saying this that you might have heard before is when one door closes, another one opens. And so, whatever it is, you lose a job, you lose a home. And this has happened to me now more than a couple times. Okay? And it's not the end of the world. I mean, we want to understand that material things are always impermanent. It's just how long that scale is. They're always impermanent, every one of them. And the first time I found myself in a situation, no one took a house away from me, but I was in my 20s and I was deeply in debt. I had invested in a lot of commercial real estate projects and the market went the wrong way, and wrong way from my perspective. And I decided, after several years of carrying nearly $1 million of debt at the age of 29, that I would be better off selling my home, beautiful home, and selling as much as I could to pay off as much of that as possible. And this was a house that I had, trying to remember, it was 50, almost 60 years old when I bought it. I had completely renovated it top to bottom with these two hands. Did most of the work myself. And a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, heard that I was selling my house. And I got a call one day, and I answered the phone, and this old friend said, "Hey man, I'm really sorry." And I recognized his voice. I said, "What are you sorry about, Brian?" And he said, "Well, I heard you have to sell your house." I said, "Yeah, but it's okay." And he knew I was there for 12 and a half years. I'd literally reconstructed the thing top to bottom, tremendous landscaping, all kinds of beautiful things. But I said to him, "Brian, it's just a house. It's a physical thing. There's no physical thing that I'm that attached to. Not one. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a physical house. There will be another one. It's just a bunch of bricks and mortar, right? I can find more bricks and mortar some other day. It's okay." And the interesting thing is, that's an example of, it seemed like a bad thing, but maybe it wasn't. Now, how do you know? Well, it's almost impossible to know in the moment when something is happening. And this is a danger because we live in a culture where most people in your life are all too eager to support your victimhood. So, relationship ends, or you lose a job, or something happens, some tragedy occurs, and everybody around you is going to say, "Oh, you poor thing. How terrible." And it's very easy to buy into this because everyone is telling you the same thing. You want to remember that you don't know that it's bad. No matter what it might look like right now, you want to remember, this could be the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, it's interesting because in this example, I'll tell you, I bought this house. At the time, I had begun buying and renovating houses to sell. I bought this house. I figured I'd live there for a few years, completely fix it up and sell it. But I got really comfortable there. It was a beautiful place. I'd created quite the swinging bachelor pad, and I had no desire to leave. I never thought I'd be there as long as I was. And in fact, if that hadn't happened, maybe I'd still be there 20 years later. I don't know. Well, all I know is that event kicked off a series of events. And that series of events ultimately led to each of you being here and having completed your fasts, and each of you watching this on YouTube to having all this whole interaction happening. Because I decided 2 years later, as a result of a whole bunch of things, including the process of needing to sell that property, that it was time for me to open a fasting center. And it had a big role to play in making this happen. Now, I've worked with more than 4,000 people hands-on, the majority of whom say they've benefited tremendously, and maybe none of this would have ever existed if I hadn't needed to sell that house. Was it a bad thing? No. I think a whole bunch of people would say, what a wonderful thing that you wound up in that situation and had to sell your house. Because otherwise you wouldn't have gone through your process. And you and I wouldn't have met 4 or 5 years ago and gone through the process a couple times. And you would have had your amazing process. Everything that's happened since then. Etc., etc. So, it's easy now to see with hindsight. What you want to do is not be constantly putting yourself in a situation where you're waiting 20 or 25 years to recognize, oh, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe that was actually kind of a good thing that happened. All we needed to do is remember in each moment, stay conscious enough to remember that we're not very good judges, at least not when it comes to our own lives, right? If you want someone to judge you, give me a call. I'm really good at judging other people. I bet you are too. Okay? But when it comes to judging stuff in my own life, not nearly as good. I mean, how many times have you had something happen and you, like maybe a relationship ends and you think, oh, how terrible. And then a year later you're going, thank God I got out of that one by the skin of my teeth. Right? Has this ever happened to you? No?
But I have seen it around.
Yeah, of course. It happens plenty. Okay? Or, maybe a job comes to an end or something happens and you're thinking, oh, well, how terrible, what am I going to do? And an amazing opportunity arises that might have never arisen. I like to think that maybe the universe has been sending us hints all along. Or maybe in my case, right? Because I absolutely found what I was passionate about. I've spent the last 16 years taking people through this process. I've seen so many incredible things happen, amazing shifts for people. And I feel great because I'm doing something that I believe is really beneficial and helping as many people as I can. But maybe that would have never happened, right? So, again, we just want to understand that, first of all, everything that happens affects everything else. Right? That's kind of the next piece, but since we're there, everything that happens affects everything else. Have you ever seen a German film called Run, Lola, Run? Anyone seen this movie? No? Run, Lola, Run. It's a great film. Check it out when you get home. If you haven't seen it, check this out. But I'll without ruining anything, I'll tell you just a little bit about it. It opens up with a young woman, 22 or 23, answering the phone in her apartment. It's her boyfriend on the other end, and he's in trouble. So she puts the phone down, and she runs out of her apartment, and she runs down the stairs, and she runs down the street, and she gets to her boyfriend 20 or 25 minutes later, and it looks like the story's over. And I'm thinking, that's the shortest feature film I've ever seen. And the next thing you know, she's back in her apartment, the phone rings again, and she picks it up, and it's the exact same thing we saw at the beginning, except this time, when she runs out of her apartment, there's some other people sitting on the stairs, and it takes her an extra 15 or 20 seconds to get around them. That changes everything. Because everything that follows that, the cars that the people she meets on the way, everything that happens is shifted because she's now 15 or 20 seconds behind. And then we see the same thing a third time with yet another iteration and 3 different possible endings, showing us that every tiny little thing affects everything that follows. So many people spend much of their life not being present. And I've talked about, in all these discussions we've had about emotional poise, I've talked about consciousness. What is consciousness? Well, one way to look at it is being present, being fully here. Fully here. I mean, you might be sitting here. I've had people say to me, I'm here. Well, yeah, they might be sitting there, the body's sitting there, but their mind is somewhere else, and you can tell that. Can't you often tell that? You're talking to someone, and you know they're not paying attention. You don't know where they are, but they're not here. Full consciousness is when you're totally here, completely. You're conscious to everything that's going on. It's awareness of what's happening, right? So you want to understand that this is a critical piece, and if you're conscious enough to know what your nature truly is, I believe we're spiritual beings. Again, I believe we live forever. We're reincarnated over and over again, and we are in this physical form today. And you may disagree with that. That's okay. But that's my belief, and I believe that we're here in this form to learn as much as possible. We're here to learn, and we're here to grow. So what if we interacted with everything that happens, not from the standpoint of, look what's happening to me, look at everything that's coming at me, look at how I'm a victim, but instead, okay, that's interesting, right? oh, look, isn't that interesting? How can I benefit from this? What can I learn from this situation? How can I use this situation as an impetus to grow? Because you can think of any tragedy you want. It could be two people getting mugged in an alley in New York City somewhere, and winding up in the hospital, the same basic thing happening to them, except that one of them locks himself away in his apartment and never goes out again because he's terrified. And the other one takes that exact same event, the exact same circumstances, but uses it instead to propel himself to the greatest level of growth possible. It's not about what happens. It's about what we choose to do with it.